I was 3 months away from my CPA designation when my mother-in-law sat me down in her kitchen and told me I needed to choose between my career and my marriage. Not my husband, my marriage. As if the two things were somehow different in her mind, as if the institution itself was the thing I was threatening by wanting to finish what I had started. She had made tea. Earl Grey, the loose-leaf kind she kept in a tin on the second shelf, the kind she only brought out when she wanted to signal that what was about to happen was civilized and reasonable and for my own good. She poured it slowly, the way people pour things when they have rehearsed the conversation and need a moment to find their entrance. My husband sat at the table beside her with his hands wrapped around his mug and his eyes somewhere near the window, not looking at me, not looking at her, not really looking at anything. He had been like that for 2 weeks, since the night of his sister's engagement dinner, since the argument that had somehow, in the days that followed, been rewritten into something I had done to this family. I should back up. My name is Willa, and I am 31 years old. I had been married for 4 years and had spent most of those years working towards something that was entirely mine. An accounting designation that I had been chasing through evening courses and exam sessions and 6-week study blocks, while also working full-time at a mid-sized firm in Mississauga. My husband knew what it cost. He had watched me eat dinner at my desk for 2 years. He had listened to me cry after failing the second module of the CFE by 4 points, and then watched me register for the retake before the rejection email had finished loading. He said he was proud of me. I believed him then. His sister, I will call her my sister-in-law, because that is what she was, even if it never felt that way, had gotten engaged in October to a man named Trevor, who worked in commercial real estate, and had the particular confidence of someone who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered to him. The engagement dinner was at my mother-in-law's house. 40 people in a dining room built for 22. Prosecco that cost more than it tasted, and my sister-in-law in a white dress at a dinner that was not yet her wedding, which should have told me something about the kind of event this was going to be. I had arrived late. Not rudely late, not deliberately late. Late because I had come straight from a study session at the library that I could not cancel because the national exam was 8 weeks away, and I was already behind where I needed to be. I had texted my husband to let him know. He had said it was fine. He said, "Go, stay as long as you need, I'll cover for you." What I did not know was that he had not covered for me at all. What I found out later was that when his mother asked where I was, he had said I was at a work thing, which was technically true and also the kind of answer that invites follow-up questions. His mother had asked what kind of work thing. He had said, "I think some studying." And his mother, who had opinions about women who prioritized studying over family dinners, had set that information down somewhere in her mind and kept it there all night, adding to it every time someone asked about me, and she had to give the same insufficient answer. I arrived at 7:43. The toasts were already done. My sister-in-law hugged me with the warmth of someone who had been given a note to be gracious and was performing it faithfully. Trevor shook my hand. My mother-in-law kissed my cheek and said, "We were starting to wonder," in a voice so light it could have meant anything. The rest of the evening was fine. I thought it was fine. I ate, I congratulated, I talked to my father-in-law about his retirement project. I laughed at the right moments. I thought I had recovered the lateness. I thought I had landed well. On the drive home, my husband was quiet in the way that is different from tired. I asked if everything was okay. He said yes. I asked again, because I knew the difference. He said his mom had mentioned that it looked bad, me showing up halfway through the dinner. I said I had texted him. He said he knew. I said, "Did you tell her that?" And there was a pause that was its own kind of answer. I let it go. I had an exam in 8 weeks. I let it go and went to sleep and woke up the next morning and opened my textbook and I let it go. Except that I didn't, really. And neither did anyone else. Over the 2 weeks that followed, the temperature in our house changed. Not all at once. Gradually, the way a room gets cold when a window has been left open, somewhere you can't see. My husband started coming home from his parents' place on Sundays, with a quietness that lasted through dinner and into the next morning. He started responding to my texts a little slower. He started saying things like, "My mom just worries about us," when I hadn't said anything about his mother at all, which told me the conversation was happening somewhere I wasn't invited to be part of. I didn't know how far it had gone until the afternoon his mother called me directly. She didn't ask if I had time to talk. She said she wanted to have me over for tea, just the two of us, because there were some things she felt needed to be said. I went because I was raised to show up when someone calls a meeting, even when you already know the meeting is going to be about you. She poured the Earl Grey. She asked about my studying. She said she thought it was wonderful that I was ambitious. She really did, and she wanted me to know this wasn't about that. And then she said it. She said that my sister-in-law had been hurt by my lateness at the engagement dinner. That it had sent a message, whether I intended it or not, that my career was more important to me than this family. She said Trevor's family had been there, had seen the empty chair, had asked questions she hadn't known how to answer. She said that my sister-in-law was planning a wedding now, and that she needed to know, they all needed to know, whether I was going to be the kind of wife and daughter-in-law who showed up, or whether they needed to adjust their expectations. She said she had spoken to my husband about it. She said he agreed that an apology to my sister-in-law would go a long way. She said if I wasn't willing to do that, it might be worth considering whether I was taking on too much, professionally speaking, and whether that was fair to my husband. I sat across from her with my tea going cold in my hands, and I felt something I can only describe as a kind of settling. Not anger, something quieter than anger. The feeling you get when something you have suspected for a long time is finally confirmed out loud by someone who doesn't know they've just handed you the proof. I had spent 4 years in this family working to be acceptable, showing up to the dinners I could make it to. Bringing the right things, saying the right things, learning which subjects my father-in-law could talk about for an hour, and which ones put him to sleep. I had folded myself into the shape this family needed me to be, and I had done it without complaint because I loved my husband, and because I had believed, genuinely believed, that love meant accommodation. But sitting in that kitchen being told that my accounting designation, the thing I had been building for 6 years, through night classes and failed exams and 5 a.m. practice problems and the kind of exhaustion that lives behind your eyes for weeks, was negotiable, was a problem to be weighed against my usefulness to a family dinner. I felt that accommodation hit its limit. I looked at my mother-in-law. I looked at my husband who was not looking at me. And I said, I'll think about it. Not yes, I'll apologize. Not you've made a fair point. Just I'll think about it. Like a door I was closing quietly so as not to wake anyone. My mother-in-law nodded. My husband exhaled, and I drove home in a silence that wasn't peaceful. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in the dark next to my husband and stared at the ceiling and thought about what had just been offered to me. Or rather, what had just been asked of me, which is a different thing entirely. I was being asked to apologize for studying for a professional exam. I was being asked to make my sister-in-law feel better about an absence that had been covered by my husband, who had agreed it was fine, and then apparently changed his answer without telling me. I was being asked to demonstrate, in a way that felt non-negotiable, that this family's comfort ranked above my professional future. I thought about what would happen if I did it. I thought about the version of myself that apologized, that sent a message to my sister-in-law saying she was right, I should have been there, it won't happen again. I thought about what precedent that set, about the next dinner I might be a few minutes late to, about what my mother-in-law would say to my husband on the next Sunday visit, about what my husband would bring home with him. I thought about all of that for a long time. And then I got up very quietly, went to the second bedroom where I kept my study materials, and I sat at my desk in the dark and I made a different decision. I did not send an apology to my sister-in-law. What I did over the next 4 days was methodical and deliberate and completely quiet. I called my firm's HR department and asked, hypothetically, about the housing assistance provisions in my employment contract for employees who relocated their primary residence. There were provisions. I called my student loan servicer and confirmed the repayment schedule was in my name only, with no co-signing arrangements. I called my bank and moved my personal savings, the account that had been mine before the marriage, that I had continued to contribute to throughout, to a new account at a different institution. I bought a parking pass for the library near my office so I could extend my study hours without depending on the garage beneath our building. I did not tell my husband any of this. I went to sleep at the same time. I made coffee in the mornings. I asked about his day. I was not planning to leave. I want to be clear about that. I was not making an exit plan. I was making a documentation plan, the kind of thing you do when you realize that the ground you are standing on may not be as stable as you thought, and you would like to understand what you are actually standing on. And then, 6 days after the tea conversation, my sister-in-law called me. She did not call to listen. She called the way people call when they have written a script and want to deliver it cleanly. She said she had given me almost a week and she hadn't heard from me. She said she was hurt, that she had thought we were closer than this, that she had expected more from a sister. She said my lateness at the dinner had humiliated her in front of Trevor's family, that his mother had asked about it at brunch the following day, that she'd had to make up a story about a family emergency, because the truth, that her sister-in-law had been studying, had sounded too bad to say out loud. That was the sentence that stopped me. That the truth had sounded too bad to say out loud. I didn't say anything for a moment, and then I said very calmly that I hadn't realized she'd told Trevor's family there was an emergency. She said she'd had no choice, that I'd put her in an impossible position. I said, I see. She said, is that all you have to say? And I said, I think so, yes. She hung up. I sat for a moment with my phone in my hand and thought about the things she had just told me without meaning to. That she had lied to Trevor's family, that she had constructed a story, that the story had grown its own structure by now, and that structure required me to be the problem at the center of it. I had not put her in an impossible position. I had arrived at a dinner 43 minutes late after sending my husband a text that he had read and acknowledged and said was fine. What she had done, telling Trevor's family there had been a family emergency, that was a lie she had told to protect her own image. And that lie now required my silence to survive. I thought about that for a long time, and then I opened my laptop and I did something I had not planned to do, something I had not decided to do, something that happened in the space between one thought and the next. I typed a short, factual email to Trevor. It said that I wanted to reach out directly, because I understood there may have been some confusion about the night of the engagement dinner. It said that I had been delayed by a study commitment, that I had communicated this to my husband in advance, and that I hoped it hadn't caused any disruption to the evening. It said I was very happy for him and my sister-in-law, and I was looking forward to the wedding. I did not mention the family emergency. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I simply told a true story in neutral language and sent it to the person who had been told a different one. And then I closed my laptop and went to bed. My phone rang at 7 the next morning. It was my husband, even though he was in the next room. He had gotten up before me, which he never did. I answered. He said, "What did you send Trevor?" I said, "Good morning." He said, "Willa, what did you send him?" His voice had the quality of something barely held together, the kind of voice that exists right at the edge of composure. I had never heard him sound like that before, and I understood, in a way I hadn't quite understood until that moment, that something had already happened before this call, that Trevor had already talked to my sister-in-law, that my sister-in-law had already called her mother, that by the time my husband picked up his phone to call me from the next room, he had already been through something. I told him what I'd sent. I read it to him, word for word, from my sent folder. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you understand what you've done?" I said I had sent a true email to the man his sister was marrying. He said it wasn't that simple. He said Trevor had forwarded it to his sister. He said his sister had called their mother. He said their mother was, and here he used a word I hadn't heard him use in 4 years of marriage, furious. I said I was sorry to hear that. He said, "Are you?" I said yes. I said I was sorry that a true account of events had caused that kind of reaction, and I meant it. He came into the bedroom then. He sat on the edge of the bed, and he looked at me with something I hadn't seen on his face before. Something that was trying to be anger but was actually much closer to fear. And he said, "Mom is going to ask you to come over. I need you to go." I said, "For what?" He said, "To fix this." I sat up in bed and looked at my husband. 4 years of marriage, 6 years together, the man who had watched me cry over an exam I failed, and had said he was proud of me the night I registered to retake it. And I felt something close very quietly inside me. I said, "I'm not going to go over there to fix a story I didn't tell." He said his mother was going to call me. I said, "I know." He said, "Willa, please." I said, "I need to go study." I got up, I made coffee. I opened my textbooks at the kitchen table, and I sat there while my husband moved around the apartment behind me. In a silence I had never heard from him before. The kind of silence that has weight and texture, and is trying to communicate something that words haven't been found for yet. His mother did call. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that one go too. My sister-in-law sent a text that said, "I think you need to take a serious look at what kind of person you're becoming." I read it and put my phone face down and went back to my notes. What I had not anticipated, what I genuinely had not calculated or planned for or imagined, was the phone call I got 2 days later from Trevor himself. He called in the afternoon. He said he wanted to talk, that he felt he owed me that. He had a voice that was calmer than I had expected given the circumstances. The voice of someone who was working through something methodically. He said he'd gotten my email and had forwarded it to my sister-in-law because he'd thought it was important that she see it. He said what happened next had surprised him. He said when he showed it to her, her first question was not what does this mean or why would Willa send this. Her first question was, how did she get your email address? He said that question had struck him. He said it had made him go back and think about some other things. Things she had told him in the weeks since the dinner. The family emergency. Yes, but also other versions of events he'd been given about the family dynamics, about me, about the kind of person I was. He said he had started asking different people different questions, quietly, in a way that probably hadn't been obvious. He said he was calling because he thought I should know that the version of the engagement dinner that his family had been told, the version my sister-in-law had given them, had been, in his word, embellished. Not just about the emergency. About other things too. About comments I had supposedly made about the venue choice. About my attitude toward the proposal. About a conversation I had allegedly had with his mother at the dinner that I had never had because I had arrived 43 minutes late. He said he wasn't sure yet what all of it meant. He said he had things to work through with my sister-in-law privately. He said he was not calling to ask me for anything. He said he was calling because he thought I was owed the information. I sat at my desk with my textbook open in front of me, and I did not say anything for a long moment. And then I said thank you. I said I appreciated it. I said I hoped things worked out for him in the way they were supposed to. He said he hoped so too. And then he said, for what it's worth, congratulations on the exam. My sister-in-law mentioned it once. She didn't mean it as a compliment, but I thought it sounded impressive. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just said thank you again, and we said goodbye. And I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after the call ended. I never went to fix anything at my mother-in-law's kitchen table. What happened instead, over the 2 weeks that followed, was quieter and more complicated, and nothing like the confrontation I had imagined. Trevor postponed the wedding, not cancelled, postponed, though the distinction felt increasingly academic as the weeks went on. My mother-in-law stopped calling me and started calling my husband, which meant our evenings started to look like his side of long, careful phone conversations that he took in the other room with the door half closed. My sister-in-law sent me one more message longer than the first that contained the sentence, "I always knew you were going to be a problem," which I screenshotted and filed without responding to. My husband and I talked. We talked more honestly than we had talked in probably 2 years, and some of what came out in those conversations was hard for both of us. He said he had known that his mother's version of events was simplified. He said he hadn't known it was actively false. I believed him, and I also understood that not knowing had been, in part, a choice he had made without acknowledging it to himself. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, and each time it sounded a little more like he meant it. I held on to those. What I did not do was go back to being the person who folded herself into the shape this family needed. That accommodation was done. I understood now what it had been built on, and I was not going to rebuild it on the same foundation. The national exam was on a Friday in late February. I took the GO train to downtown Toronto at 6:30 in the morning, sat in a room with 240 other people, and spent 6 hours answering questions I had been preparing for long enough that some of them felt like old conversations. I did not feel calm, exactly. But I felt ready, which is different and better. The results came 6 weeks later. I had passed. My husband took me to dinner that night, at a place I had pointed at once in passing and not thought about again, which meant he had been paying attention in ways I hadn't always given him credit for. We ordered the tasting menu. We talked about things that weren't his family, or my designation, or the engagement that had become one of those subjects that required care around. We talked like two people who were trying to find their way back to something that had existed before things got heavy, and I thought that maybe we could. I thought it was possible. I am a CPA now. I have a plate on my office door that says so. My sister-in-law's wedding happened eventually, smaller than originally planned, in May, at a venue that was not the one that had originally been booked. I attended. I wore a green dress, and I sat at the table I was assigned, and I was warm and present, and I ate the salmon, and I danced once, briefly with my father-in-law, who whispered that he was glad I was there. I did not dance with my mother-in-law. She and I exist now in the particular kind of careful peace that happens between two people who understand each other very clearly and have decided, for the sake of the people they both love, to work within those limits. She pours the Earl Grey when I come for Sunday dinner. I drink it. We talk about things that are easy to talk about. It is not warm exactly, but it is honest in its own way, and I have found that honest is something I can work with. My husband asked me once, a few months after everything settled, whether I regretted sending that email to Trevor. I thought about it for a real moment before I answered. I said no. I said what I regretted was the years I had spent apologizing for the space I took up, for the studying, for the late arrivals, and the priorities and the ambition that made certain people in that house uncomfortable. I said the email had been the first thing in 4 years that I had done entirely on my own terms, without running it through the filter of whether this family would approve. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I know. I think I knew that when you sent it. I didn't ask him why he hadn't said so sooner. We were past the point of those questions. What I know is this. I sit at my own desk now with a designation after my name that no dinner table conversation can revoke. I wake up without that particular low dread I had carried for years without quite naming it. And the study notes from the night I chose to stay at the library, the ones I was using when I arrived 43 minutes late to a dinner that tried to cost me everything, are still in a binder on my shelf. I kept them. Not as evidence, not as ammunition. Just as a reminder of the kind of decision that looks small from the outside and turns out, from the inside, to be everything.